The silence was always the loudest part. If you grew up in a certain kind of home, you know exactly what I mean. It wasn't the shouting that stayed with you, though there may have been that too. It was the anticipation, the way the air in a room could shift, the way you learned to read the angle of a shoulder, the tempo of footsteps on the stairs, the particular quality of a sigh from across the table. You learn to become very, very small because somehow, without anyone ever saying it directly, you understood that your presence in that room was a disturbance to the peace. That simply by existing, by needing, by being, you were asking for too much. We have a phrase for this feeling, walking on eggshells. But that metaphor doesn't quite capture it, does it? Eggshells imply something fragile outside of you. The truth was that you were the fragile thing, and the eggshells were inside your chest. Now there's an old saying we teach children: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. It's a comforting little rhyme. It's also, according to decades of psychological research, profoundly untrue. In 2008 alone, over 50,000 children were identified as victims of emotional abuse in the United States. And that number represents only the cases that were reported, documented, and categorized. The real figure is almost certainly much, much higher because emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises, it doesn't show up on x rays. The scars it creates are internal, etched into the architecture of a developing mind. Today, we are going to do something difficult together. We are going to look at 8 of the most toxic verbal patterns that parents use with their children. But we are not doing this to create a list of grievances or to assign blame. We are doing this to understand something far more important: how the words spoken to you in your childhood became the voice that still speaks inside your head today. Because that voice, it was never yours to begin with. Let's begin with something fundamental, something so obvious that we rarely stop to think about it. When you were born, you had no idea who you were. This isn't a philosophical statement, it's a developmental fact. Infants don't possess a concept of self. They don't look in the mirror and recognize a separate being looking back. That awareness comes later, built slowly, piece by piece. And here's what's crucial to understand: the pieces don't come from within, they come from outside. They come from people who raise us. There's a concept in sociology called the looking glass self, developed by a scholar named Charles Cooley over a century ago. The idea is elegant, and once you hear it, impossible to forget. Cooley suggested that we develop our sense of identity by imagining how we appear to others, imagining how others judge that appearance, and then developing feelings about ourselves based on those perceived judgments. For a child, there is no imagining required. The judgments are spoken aloud. They are delivered at the breakfast table, in the car on the way to school, in the bathroom while getting ready for bed. And the primary mirror, the most important mirror, is the parent. So, what happens when the mirror is cracked? Consider the child who is told repeatedly that their body is wrong. You're getting fat. Why do you eat so much? Look at your sister. She doesn't have that problem. Or perhaps the opposite. You're too skinny. You look sick. What's wrong with you? The specific words vary, but the message is consistent. Your body, the vessel you did not choose and cannot escape, is fundamentally unacceptable. Now consider another variation: the child whose way of being is mocked, the way they walk, the sound of their laugh, the expressions on their face. Why do you always make that face? Stop being so dramatic. You look ridiculous when you do that. These aren't corrections. They aren't guidance. They are small demolitions conducted daily against the child's sense of existing naturally in the world. The psychological term for what develops is body dysmorphia, a persistent, distressing preoccupation with perceived flaws in one's physical appearance. But the clinical language doesn't capture the lived experience. The lived experience is this: you grow up, unable to trust your own reflection. You look in the mirror and you don't see what's actually there. You see what you were told was there: the fat, the awkwardness, the wrongness. And it extends beyond the mirror. There's a phenomenon in adolescent psychology called the imaginary audience. The teenage sense that everyone is watching you, judging you, noticing your every flaw. For most people, this fades with maturity. The adult brain learns that others are mostly preoccupied with themselves. But for those who grew up under the scrutiny of a critical parent, the imaginary audience never quite dissolves. It follows them into adulthood. It sits across from them at restaurants, making it impossible to eat in public without acute self consciousness. It stands behind them in meetings, whispering that everyone has noticed the flaw, the imperfection, the way they are sitting wrong. The parent in these cases did something profound. They took the child's body, which should have been a home, a source of sensation and pleasure and movement through the world, and they transformed it into an exhibit, something to be observed, something to be found lacking. And the child learned to observe themselves the same way, harshly, relentlessly, without mercy. The mirror of shame, once installed, is very difficult to remove because it doesn't hang on a wall, it lives behind the eyes. There is a difference between guilt and shame. It's a distinction that therapists make often, but it's worth sitting for a moment because understanding it can unlock something important about the way certain childhoods mark us. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt is about behavior. It's specific, contained, and ultimately repairable. You make a mistake, you can apologize. You can do better next time. The self remains intact. Shame is different. Shame is about essence. It doesn't point to an action, it points to you. And when shame takes root early enough, it doesn't feel like an emotion. It feels like a fact, like gravity, like something that simply is. Now imagine a child who hears, in a moment of parental frustration or cruelty, the following words: I wish you had never been born. Or perhaps it's less direct. Perhaps it's, my life would have been so much easier without you. I gave up everything for you. You have no idea what I sacrificed. Or perhaps it's about money. Do you know how much you cost? Do you think food just appears? Every time you ask for something, it's like you are reaching into my pocket. The child hearing these words is faced with an impossible equation. They did not ask to be born. They did not choose to need food, clothing, shelter, care. These are not luxuries. They are the baseline requirements of human survival. And yet, somehow, the parent has framed these needs as impositions, as debts, as evidence of the child's fundamental selfishness. What does a child do with this information? They cannot leave. They cannot provide for themselves. They cannot undo their own existence. And so they do the only available thing to them. They internalize the message. They come to believe, in a place deeper than conscious thought, that their very survival is an act of aggression against the people they love. That by continuing to breathe, to eat, to take up space, they are hurting someone. This is a toxic shame in its purest form. Not I did something bad, but I am the bad thing. My existence is the problem. If I could just need less, want less, be less, then maybe I would deserve to be here. There's a framework in trauma psychology called the 4Fs: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. These are nervous system's primary responses to threat. Most people are familiar with the first three, but it's the fourth, the fawn response, that's particularly relevant here. Fawning is the act of appeasing, of making yourself agreeable, useful, invisible, of anticipating what others need and providing it before they have to ask. Children who grow up believing they are burdens often become exceptional fawners. They learn to take up as little space as possible. They learn to suppress their own needs so completely that they may eventually lose access to them altogether. They become the helpful one, the easy one, the child who never causes trouble. And they carry this into adulthood. They become the friend who always listens but never shares, the partner who gives endlessly but cannot receive, the employee who works late, volunteers for extra projects, and apologizes for things that aren't their fault. They are trying still after all these years to earn the right to exist, to prove that they are not too much, to justify the resources they consume simply by being alive. The tragedy is this: the child who was told they were a burden often grows into the adult who gives the most. They are not selfish. They never were. But deep inside, in a room they rarely visit, there is still a small figure trying to disappear, still trying to take up less space, still apologizing, silently, for the crime of being born. And the weight they carry is not their own. It never was. It was placed on their shoulders by someone who should have been strong enough to carry it themselves. There's a question that haunts certain childhoods. It's asked in kitchens and living rooms, at report card time, and after sports games, in moments of disappointment, and sometimes even in moments that should have been celebration. The question is, why can't you be more like your brother, your sister, the neighbor's child, anyone other than who you are? Or perhaps it arrives not as a question, but as a verdict. You are useless. You are a failure. You'll never amount to anything. What is wrong with you? These are what psychologists call absolute statements, and they do something very specific to the developing mind. They eliminate nuance. They collapse the full spectrum of human capability with all its gradations, its learning curves, its fits and starts into a binary. You are either good or you are bad, worthy or worthless, enough or not enough. There is no middle ground, there is no room for growth. The psychologist Carol Dweck has spent decades researching that she calls mindset, the underlying beliefs people hold about their own abilities. She distinguishes between two orientations. A growth mindset sees talent and intelligence as malleable. Mistakes are information. Struggle is part of the process. Improvement is always possible. A fixed mindset, by contrast, sees ability as static. You either have it or you don't. Success means you're smart. Failure means you're not. And every performance becomes a referendum on your fundamental nature. Now, here's what's important to understand: children are not born with a fixed mindset, they are taught it. And one of the most effective ways to teach it is through the language of comparison and absolute judgment. When a parent says, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" they are not offering constructive feedback. They are communicating something far more insidious: that the child as they currently exist is insufficient, and not just insufficient in a way that can be addressed through effort or learning, insufficient in their very being. The sister is simply better, the child is simply less. The message lands in the bones, and it stays there. This is compound when parents engage in what family therapists call triangulation, the practice of using one child against another, praising one sibling in front of the other, comparing achievements, creating an unspoken competition for parental approval. The damage here is twofold. First, it convinces each child that love is a finite resource, something to be earned and defended rather than freely given. Second, it destroys the horizontal bond between siblings. The relationship that should be a source of solidarity and support becomes instead another arena for judgment. The child grows up, they become adults, and they carry these patterns into boardrooms and relationships and creative pursuits. They become high achievers who feel like frauds, successful people who are waiting always for someone to discover that they don't actually deserve any of it. We have a name for this: imposter syndrome. It's the persistent ability to internalize accomplishment, the nagging sense that you fooled everyone, that your success is luck or accident, that you are one mistake away from being exposed as the failure you truly are. And here's the cruel irony: The people who suffer from imposter syndrome are often those who work the hardest. They overperform, overdeliver, overfunction, not because they are ambitious, but because they are terrified. They are still trying to outrun the voice that told them they were useless, still trying to prove with one more achievement, one more accolade, one more late night at the office that the verdict was wrong. But the verdict was never based on evidence. It was never a fair assessment. It was a parent's frustration or cruelty or limitation projected onto a child who had no way to defend themselves. The thief of potential doesn't always steal by discouraging ambition. Sometimes it steals by making achievements meaningless, by ensuring that no matter how high you climb, you will never feel like you've arrived, because arrival was never actually possible. The goalposts were designed to move, and the child who was told they would never amount to anything, they may have amounted to quite a lot, but inside, in the place where it matters most, they still feel like they are falling short, still measuring themselves against a sibling, a standard, a ghost, still answering a question that should never have been asked. There's a particular kind of fear that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with racing hearts and sweating palms, the way fear does in movies. Instead, it hums. It lives in the background like a refrigerator you've stopped consciously hearing, but that shapes the silence of your home nonetheless. This is the fear of the child who was taught that safety is conditional, that love can be revoked without warning, that the ground beneath their feet might at any moment give way. Consider two phrases. They seem different on the surface, but they produce remarkably similar effects. The first, if you don't behave, I'm leaving. I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again. The second, I promise we'll go to the park this weekend. I promise I'll come to your recital. I promise things will be different. The threat of abandonment is overt. It weaponizes a child's most primal fear, the terror of being left alone, unprotected, unable to survive, and deploys it as a tool of control. The child learns viscerally that their parents' presence is not guaranteed, that it must be earned through compliance, through good behavior, through the suppression of any need or emotion that might prove inconvenient. The broken promise is subtler, but no less damaging, because a promise creates anticipation. It opens a door in the child's heart, and when that promise is broken, when the park trip doesn't happen, when the recital seat remains empty, when things don't get different, the child learns something profound about the nature of hope. They learn that hope is dangerous, that trust is set up for disappointment, that the safest thing to do is expect nothing at all. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called intermittent reinforcement. It describes what happens when a reward is delivered unpredictably, sometimes present, sometimes absent, with no reliable pattern. And here's what's counterintuitive. Intermittent reinforcement doesn't weaken a behavior, it strengthens it dramatically. This is why slot machines are addictive. This is why we check our phones compulsively for notifications. The inconsistency, the unpredictability creates a neurological loop. The brain becomes hypervigilant, constantly scanning for the signal that the reward might come. Dopamine spikes not with the reward itself, but with the anticipation of it. Now apply this to a child's relationship with an unpredictable parent. Sometimes the parent is warm, present, loving. Sometimes they are cold, distant, threatening. Sometimes the promise is kept. Sometimes it evaporates without explanation. The child cannot identify a pattern. They cannot figure out the rules. And so their nervous system does the only logical thing. It stays on high alert, constantly, watching for signs, trying to predict, trying to control the uncontrollable. This is the architecture of anxiety. It's built early and it's built to last. Attachment theorists describe this pattern as anxious attachment, a relational style characterized by a deep hunger for closeness paired with a persistent fear that closeness will be withdrawn. The anxiously attached person craves reassurance but can never quite believe it. They are waiting always for the other shoe to drop, for the warmth to disappear, for the promise to break. And here is where the pattern becomes most tragic. These children grow into adults who often find themselves drawn to relationships that replicate the original wound. They may choose partners who are emotionally unavailable, who run hot and cold, who offer just enough intimacy to keep hope alive, but never enough to feel secure. It isn't lack of self respect, it's a neurological familiarity. The anxious brain was trained on unpredictability. And so unpredictability feels like home. Stability, by contrast, can feel foreign, suspicious, even boring. The nervous system doesn't know what to do with a partner who simply shows up consistently without drama. It keeps waiting for the catch. The child who is threatened with abandonment often becomes the adult who cannot leave. They stay in jobs that diminish them, friendships that drain them, relationships that hurt them, because at least the pain is familiar. At least they know how to survive it. The unknown possibility of something better feels more terrifying than the certainty of something bad. And the child whose trust was broken by empty promises, they often become the adult who cannot fully arrive. They hold back, they keep one foot out of the door, they struggle to invest completely in anything, a relationship, a career, a dream, because some part of them is still protecting against the devastation of believing in something that might not come true. The architecture of anxiety has many rooms, and the blueprints were drawn long ago by hands that should have been building something else entirely. If you have recognized yourself in anything we've discussed so far, I want to pause here and say something directly to you. None of this was your fault. The shame you carry is not a reflection of who you are. The anxiety that hums beneath your days is not a character flaw. The voice in your head that tells you you're too much or not enough or fundamentally broken, that voice was installed. It was placed inside you by people who were supposed to protect you, and it has been running like background software ever since. But here's what I also want you to know: software can be rewritten. The architecture of your mind was shaped by your childhood, yes, but you are no longer a child, and the renovation, while difficult, is possible. What follows are not quick fixes. There is no quick fix for wounds this deep, but there are practices, ways of being with yourself that can, over time, begin to loosen the grip of the old patterns. Think of this not as erasing the past, but as building something new alongside it: a second voice, a kind presence, an internal parent who can offer what the original one could not. The first practice is something therapists call cognitive diffusion. The name is technical, but the concept is simple. It means learning to separate yourself from your thoughts, to observe them rather than being swallowed by them. Here's how this works in practice. The next time you notice the toxic voice arising, the one that says you're a burden, you're not good enough, or you don't deserve this, I want you to try something. Instead of believing the thought, label it. Say to yourself, silently or even aloud, that is my mother's voice. This is my father's voice. That is not mine. This might feel strange at first. It might even feel untrue because the voice has been with you so long that it feels like you. But that's precisely the point. The voice was internalized so early and so completely that you lost track of where it came from. Naming its origin is the first step in reclaiming the space it occupies. You are not your thoughts. You are the one who can witness your thoughts. And in that witnessing, there is the beginning of freedom. The second practice goes deeper. It is called reparenting, and it involves doing something that may feel uncomfortable at first, offering yourself the words you never received. Here's an exercise: take a piece of paper, actual paper, not a screen, and write a letter. But this letter is not from you, it is from the parent you deserved, the one who should have been there, the one who perhaps simply did not exist. Write to the child version of yourself and respond to the wounds directly. Where the real parent said you cost too much, the letter says you deserve to be supported. Your needs are not a burden, they are simply needs, and meeting them is my privilege. Where the real parent said, "Why can't you be like your sibling?" The letter says, "You are not in competition with anyone. You are singular, irreplaceable, enough exactly as you are." Where the real parent said, "I'll leave you if you don't behave." The letter says, "I'm not going anywhere. My presence does not depend on your performance. You are safe with me." This is not pretending. This is not denial. This is building the internal structure that was never built for you. It is construction, not fantasy. And the more you practice it, the more that second voice, the kind one, the patient one, begins to take up residence alongside the old. The third practice is perhaps the most difficult. It is grieving. Because here is the truth that no amount of healing can change. You cannot go back. You cannot undo what was done. You cannot make your parents into different people. And you cannot give your childhood self the protection they needed at the time they needed it. This is a loss, a real one, and it deserves to be mourned. So many of us skip this step. We intellectualize, we focus on strategies and solutions. We tell ourselves that we've moved on, that we are over it, that dwelling on the past is self indulgent. But grief that is not allowed to move through us does not disappear, it calcifies. It becomes the tightness in the chest, the quickness to anger, the tears that arrive without warning and then retreat just as fast. You are allowed to grieve the childhood you didn't have. You are allowed to feel the weight of what was taken from you. And in that grieving, paradoxically, there is a release because you are finally acknowledging the truth of what happened, not minimizing it, not explaining it away, not protecting the people who should have protected you. You are saying, "This happened, it mattered, and I am allowed to feel it." We began this conversation at a dinner table, a place that should have been nourishment of the body, yes, but also of the spirit. A place where a child should have learned that they were welcome, that their presence was a gift, not an imposition, that they could speak and be heard, need and be met, exist and be celebrated for the existence alone. For many of us, the table held something else entirely. It held silence that suffocated, words that diminished, an atmosphere so charged with unspoken rules and imminent disappointment that we learned to make ourselves small just to survive the meal. But look at the table now. It is empty. And there is something liberating in that emptiness. Because the people who sat there, the ones who should have known better, who should have done better, they no longer get to define the terms of your life. Their voices may still echo, their patterns may still surface, but they are no longer at the table. You are. And the remarkable thing about childhood, the thing that perhaps no one told you when you were busy just trying to get through each day, is this: you get to set the table now. You get to decide who sits there. You get to decide what is said, what is allowed, what kind of silence fills the room. You get to choose whether the atmosphere is one of judgment or one of grace. This is not a small thing. This is, in fact, everything. The words spoken to us as children are like seeds planted in a garden. For many of us, those seeds were weeds: doubt, fear, shame, the persistent sense that something was fundamentally wrong with who we were. And for years, perhaps decades, we watered those seeds without knowing it. We tended them with self criticism and harsh internal voices, and relationships that confirmed what we had always believed about ourselves. But here is what I want to leave you with today: the garden is yours now. It has always been yours, even when it didn't feel that way. You cannot change the seeds that were planted yesterday. You cannot go back and stop the hand that scattered them. But you can choose, starting today, starting now, which seeds you water. You can notice when you are feeding the old weeds, the comparison, the shame, the relentless not enoughness, and you can gently put down the watering can. You can turn your attention instead to something new, something you plant yourself, a thought perhaps that feels foreign at first. I'm allowed to be here. I'm allowed to take up space. I'm allowed to need things. and want things and be imperfect and still be worthy of love. It will feel like a lie at first. That's okay. Keep planting it anyway, because the voice that told you otherwise, the one that has felt like truth for so long, that voice was never yours. It was inherited, and you are finally allowed to give it back. This conversation has meant something to you. I invite you to subscribe to The Quiet Mind. We sit together in spaces like this one, exploring the parts of ourselves that rarely get spoken about, shining light into the rooms we learned to keep closed. You are not alone in this. You never were. Thank you for being here.